I'm here with the Reverend Jennifer Monroe Nathans, comedian from Norfolk, Massachusetts. So, Jen, how did you get involved in being a comedian?
Well, that's a great question. I will tell you my age. I turned 40 a little while ago, and when I did, I realized that there was something kind of on my bucket list, this list of things that I want to accomplish at some point in my life, and trying stand-up comedy was one of those things. So I found a class, and I took this wonderful class with a comedian in Rhode Island. His name was Frank O'Donnell, and it was wonderful, and I just loved it, and I've been doing it ever since.
So it wasn't something that you wanted to be when you were a child? Like, you're like, oh, I want to grow up and be a comedian? Wasn't like that?
I'm not sure I knew what a stand-up comedian was when I was a child. In college, I certainly knew about them, but I didn't think it was something that I would ever do. So really, it's just been in the past couple of years.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. So after you took those classes, what did you do to really start performing in front of people with the shows?
Well, as part of the class, we had a big final performance, and I enjoyed it and asked the person who books for the club if I could come back, and he said yes, and next thing I know, other people were inviting me to perform, and so it just sort of took off naturally on its own.
Oh, wow. What kind of people do you perform for?
All different kinds of crowds, really, and each crowd is so different. I'll perform at like a comedy club, which has kind of a rougher crowd, maybe, you know, the folks with, drinks at the bar kind of a place. And I'll perform, one of the last gigs I did was down at this really large temple in Westport, Connecticut, as part of a tour called the Laugh in Peace Comedy Tour, where I performed with a rabbi and a Muslim comedian.
Oh, wow.
So, and that crowd was very different than the bar crowd. So really, I've performed for all kinds of people.
What has been your favorite performing experience so far?
I have to say performing with Rabbi Alper has he's a great guy and really a lot of fun. And the audiences at the temples they're great, they're really into the comedy, and so we have a really nice time at those shows.
So for your comedy routines, do you prepare things beforehand, or you just come up with jokes on the spot?
No, I prepare beforehand, and I have kind of a set routine that I use, but sometimes I improvise and come up with things just on the spot.
How do you come up with things?
By the grace of God, really. A lot of it is just if someone in the crowd's talking back to me, I'll talk back, and sometimes things come out of that. Or it might be a situation that I experienced on the way to the comedy club or on the way to the show. And so it all sort of plays together.
Are there any comedians who inspire you?
Yes. Ellen DeGeneres,
I love her. I watch her show all the time.
Doesn't she have just a fabulous sense of timing?
Funny.
I love her comedy, and I love that she's not hurtful in her comedy.
That's really important, not to hurt people.
It is, and a lot of comedians, their comedy is based on hurting other people or making fun of other people, and I just love that she doesn't do that. So, I mean, she might tweak at someone, but it's not vindictive, it's not malicious, and I like that.
So there's a fine line between making fun of someone and just joking around. Do you know what that line is? How do you stay on the safe side of that?
I think so. Well, I think one of the rules for myself is I try and joke from my own experience. So
laughing at yourself?
Laughing at myself a lot, laughing at my own situations a lot, but not making fun of somebody who, I don't know their situation, I don't really know what's going on with them. So that's one of the rules that I try and have. But also I think it's the difference between teasing a friend and making fun of somebody that you don't know well.
Yeah,
there's that relationship.
Do you ever include celebrities in what you make fun of? Because I know a lot of comedians make fun of celebrities.
I don't in my act because I'm not fortunate enough to know any celebrities. If
I
knew
that's
them,
a good rule, yeah.
If I knew them, they would be fair game. But I don't at this point.
Have you ever met any celebrities through being a comedian?
Other than Rabbi Alper, no, I haven't. Not yet.
What's the best thing about being a comedian?
For me, the best thing about being a comedian is making people laugh and the relationship that we form and the community that we form, because when we're all laughing together, that makes the room be like one family in a sense, that if we're all laughing at the same thing, for that one moment in time, we're a community. And for me, that just sets me on fire. I think it's just fabulous.
That's great. Have you ever had any embarrassing moments when you're performing a set and like maybe no one laughs or you realize you said something?
Yes. There have been times when I throw out the punchline and pretty sure I hear crickets because nobody got it or my timing was off. I had one sort of interesting experience where I joked about going to the emergency room for having chest pains. And the end of the story, I had all these great jokes about it, but I never went back to say it was actually nothing and there was really no problem. So when I finished the set, I said to a colleague who was here, I'm like, why didn't anybody laugh at that? He said, well, we were all waiting to hear if you were okay. And I totally forgot that part. So yeah, there are times when it happens, but you get back up on the stage the next time and try again.
So is there like a set way to deal with being like embarrassed or saying something? You just have to keep going?
I try and keep going and laugh at it because I'm a human being and I'm painfully a human being. I make mistakes all the time. And so learning to forgive myself for it and move on, it's an important life lesson.
So do you perform with other people on stage when you're doing your comedy routines?
Yes. At the clubs, there are usually 4 or 5 other comedians, and we'll have maybe 10 minutes each to go up and perform. And that's fun because we play off each other a little bit, or you get to sit in the back of the room and laugh along with everyone else.
So have you made a lot of friends through comedy?
I have made some great friends through comedy, and it's wonderful when we're all doing the same show again. We'll see each other, we'll hang in the back of the room and
chit-chat. It's like a whole community.
It really is. It's a great group, and we have fun together. And it's again that line of teasing the people you know versus making fun of the people you don't know.
Yeah.
So when we're together in the back of the room, I could come back and they'd be like, "Whoa, you blow that! That was an awful joke." And yeah, I know. And we'll tease each other that way. So it's nice to have. But they'll also be very supportive. That was a great set, and wow, I love that new bit you just tried out, and they'll be helpful. So it's great.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Well, we'll be right back to talk more about this. We need to cut to a commercial break. Be back in a minute. Welcome back to Back Talk Teen. I'm Julia here with Jen. So Jen, what some of our viewers might not know and find really surprising is besides being a stand-up comedian, you are also the Reverend. So what do you do besides being a comedian?
Well, in addition to being a stand-up comedian, I'm also the pastor of the Church of Christ Congregational in Millis, Massachusetts.
Oh, that's really interesting. Do people recognize you when you're doing your stand-up comedian routines, and then when you're also being a pastor? Do they make that connection? People know?
They do, because it's really a part of my act, and it's a fun part of my life. And it's amazing how much they go hand in hand, really. Ministry and comedy, they're a lot alike in many ways.
How are they alike?
Well, in ministry and in comedy, we're trying to build relationships and make a community, and that's what we do when we're laughing at a comedy club, and that's what we do when we're together in church. So it's building relationships, building community, and for me personally, I think making people laugh is a ministry, because life is hard, and so when we laugh together, or when we can look at the things in life that are hard and learn to laugh at them, that's a real blessing as far as I'm concerned.
So when you're in church, when you're being a pastor, do you make a lot of jokes to make people laugh, things that you've learned from your comedy routines?
Sometimes, yes. I like to think that my sermons are interesting, and no one has fallen asleep yet that I know of. But it's also, there's a time and a place for everything. So my sermon is not my comedy routine. My comedy routine is not my sermon.
So
but there are elements.
Do you ever bring any aspects from your ministry into when you're performing your comedy routines?
Oh, absolutely, because a lot of funny things happen. Now, I don't, again, there's a fine line. I don't
bring
ever
religion into it.
I don't ever share any, confidences, or I'm very, very careful about what I use in my comedy act, but so much of it is funny. There are just funny situations that happen at churches that, real life kind of the silliness that make for good comedy.
So are you known at the comedy clubs as the Reverend? Is that like your little nickname? Or?
Well, no, they just call me Jen.
Oh, really?
Which is good.
They don't know that you're also...
Well, when I'm introduced, it's usually just Jen Monroe Nathans, and then part of my routine, I tell folks that I'm an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, and that my act will be clean. And sometimes people actually boo.
Oh, really?
When I say that, and I joke it off because I say to them, well, I won't be using that F word, and then they kind of get a little nervous about it, and I say, because you probably don't know what frankincense is anyway. And we go on from there.
That's funny. So people don't hold that against you or anything. Even though they boo you, they just once you start performing, then they kind of forget about it, or?
I think so. I think maybe when people hear that I'm a minister, there's an expectation of how I'm going to act, or how I'm going to behave, or what I'm going to say. And maybe even in these comedy clubs, there's an expectation that I'm not going to be funny, or I'm there to preach at them, which isn't the case at all. I'm there to be funny. I'm there to be a comedian. So we get over that and we keep going.
Are there any other comedians that you know of that are also involved in ministry, or are you the only one that we know?
No, I do know of others.
Oh, wow.
The Reverend Susan Sparks. She's a Baptist minister in Manhattan, and she's a stand-up comedian. And Bob Alper is a rabbi. And there are quite a few of us out there.
So did you get involved in being a pastor before you got involved in being a comedian?
Yes. Yes, I was a pastor first. And the comedy came a little bit later.
So that was just like a hobby on the side at first?
Although one might say that being a church pastor is really good training for a stand-up comedian.
Really? I've never heard anyone say that before. Surprising.
Well, it's a lot
I can see what you mean. That does make sense. Because when you're in front of the church, right, you're being in front of people, kind of performing and making people feel better, right? And when you're a comedian, you're making people laugh, making people feel better. So that's great. That sounds like a really fun job.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for being here and talking to me today. For Jen, I'm Julia, and thanks for watching. Okay.